This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
How much do you know about methane? Is it on your radar? Is it something that you think about? Is it something you talk about with your friends? Is it probably not, right? I think that's probably what's being acknowledged as we take a look at the most recent. This is the summer issue of Alberta Views magazine, and the piece written by Jeff Gailus, who we're going to be talking about in just a sec. Hidden harm reads the headline. Why Alberta's methane reduction claims can't be trusted. You may have noticed this week on the show we're focusing. We're putting a keen eye on Canada's energy industry. We talked about it with Liberal Minister Randy Boissonnault on Monday. We talked about it with Conservative MP Mike Lake on Tuesday. Yesterday's broadcast, on Wednesday, it was Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault, that joined us. A shout out to the Calgary Herald and Chris Varco this morning for referencing our interview with the Environment Minister in Varco's piece published this morning. It says, well, it doesn't sound like a lot of tangible progress was made. It's encouraging that the various sides are actually talking. We're talking about government conversations between the provincial and federal counterparts. Minister Guilbeault joining us yesterday, just hours before his meeting with Alberta's Minister of Environment. That's Rebecca Schultz, of course. And we were curious to know where the federal minister landed on S&P numbers. These are the ones that everybody's talking about this week that show that Alberta's oil sands is going to have to dial back production by more than 1 million barrels a day, 1.3 million barrels a day, to meet these new targets, the net zero targets. They want to get Canada, the federal government does, to a net zero electricity grid within the next few years. And this report, which was released on Monday, suggests that this could mean 9,000 or 10,000 jobs lost. Now, that's no small thing. And so we asked the minister if this was on his radar. We wanted to know how he felt about some of the political posturing that was happening, in particular from the two Prairie premiers. I'm talking about Scott Moe and Danielle Smith. Smith calling the federal government's plan unconstitutional. Moe asserting that, well, basically Ottawa wants to kill the energy sector, the oil and gas sector. As a matter of fact, Johnny, why don't we tee up? This was a brief exchange. This was a snippet. If you missed our conversation on Wednesday with the federal environment minister, we put Saskatchewan Premier Moe's comments in front of him, and here's what he had to say about those numbers. From Premier Scott Moe, if it wasn't clear before, it is now, quote, the Trudeau government doesn't want to just reduce emissions in our energy sector. They want to completely shut down our energy sector. Some people are saying that this could mean up to 9, even 10,000 job losses in the oil sands. What's your message to people that are going to see this interview that feel like their livelihood could evaporate here?
It fascinates me that people would come to those conclusions without even knowing what the target is. We're still working on the regulation. I don't even know what the target is. We said that we would cap emissions at current level and that they would go down over time. We haven't even decided what the trajectory would be by 2030, 2035, 2040. So for organizations like S&P and others to make those bold claims without having any of the details, I find it quite rich.
Quite rich, says the environment minister. Now, what this reiterated to me, and maybe to you as well, is it seems like not everybody knows exactly what they're talking about. There's not exactly a fulsome understanding of what's happening in the sector, what emissions actually look like, how we're going to get to that position where Canada can declare itself to be adequately meeting, to be answering those commitments on those targets, and what the implications might be. And so that's why this show, why we're sinking our teeth into this conversation, into this debate. In just a second, journalist Jeff Gailus, I almost guarantee, is going to blow your mind with talk about a satellite monitoring system. We're going to get an idea of how the world is keeping an eye on emissions like methane, but maybe why those numbers aren't being presented either in good faith or in the public eye or in, I guess you might say, meaningful fashion. Why is it still deemed to be a hidden harm? That's coming up in just a second. I wanted to briefly let you know that in Canada right now, when we're talking about jobs, certified financial planners, a lot of them are making a great living. As a matter of fact, a lot of them are earning six figures right now, and the demand for this profession for CFPs is growing fast. You can become a certified financial planner with Business Career College. You could launch your own business, earn great money, and help others achieve their financial goals. Business Career College is the best place to get your CFP with online courses, expert instructors to help you through, and decades of experience helping students succeed. You can get your journey started today by checking out businesscareercollege.com. Jeff Gailus is the author of a feature piece in the July-August issue of Alberta Views magazine. It's Hidden Harm, and we're about to take a look at his deep dive into methane. Jeff is an award-winning writer and author of The Grizzly Manifesto and Little Black Lies, which expose corporate and political spin in the global war for oil. He's joining us live this morning from his home in Missoula, Montana, making his Real Talk debut. Jeff, it's nice to see you there.
Nice to see you too, Ryan.
Now, we oftentimes ask folks if their Zoom background is real or fake. Yours feels very real, and it seems to me like it's styled by someone who gets what makes you tick. For the majority of people that are going to hear this on the podcast, you are surrounded by stacks of books. Tell us about your library there. Tell us about what we're seeing behind you.
Oh, there's a whole bunch of books about everything from literary theory to the research around tailings ponds and what's in them. I'm a big fan of books and doing research, and that's pretty much why I got into journalism in the first place.
What is it about Alberta and Canada's energy sector, in particular oil and gas, that has so captured your attention, prompting you to write so much and pay so much attention to it?
Well, I grew up in Alberta. I live in Missoula, Montana right now, but I grew up in Alberta. And I actually didn't know that much about oil and gas or politics until I moved to Europe, Budapest, Hungary, in fact, and started working for an environmental organization, not an advocacy organization, but an organization called the Regional Environmental Center that was set up by the Canadian government, the American government, and the Japanese government to help Central and Eastern Europe come to terms with some of the environmental problems that were the legacy of the Soviet years. And I was introduced to lots of information on environmental issues and attended a big conference in Sofia, Bulgaria, where the representatives of the Canadian and U.S. governments were. And it shocked me at that conference that Germany and the Dutch were very progressive on these issues, and Canada and the U.S. was pretty recalcitrant and stubborn and not particularly progressive, which concerned me and reminded me that the story I was told about Canada and Alberta in particular about responsibly managing natural resources and so on maybe wasn't as true or as fulsome as I was told.
Your piece is evergreen, so to speak. We're talking about methane and monitoring, satellite monitoring, and we'll get into it in just a second. I mean, it's really fascinating stuff. But I wanted to ask you first about what's happening right now, kind of the timeliness of what's happening. We spoke yesterday with Canada's Environment Minister, the federal Environment Minister. Yep. Just before he's talking to Alberta's Environment Minister, we've heard the Liberal and Conservative talking points, I guess a cynic might describe them as, this week. And, of course, it is a big week week. You've got the federal cabinet ministers doing their cross-country tours. A lot of them are in Alberta right now, and it means that the attention, the focus has been ramped up on this relationship, on Ottawa working to achieve its goals, to meet its commitments when it comes to going net zero, when it comes to reducing emissions, when it comes to, I suppose, what you might describe as being a legitimate global player in the fight to respond to climate change. And then you've got Alberta politicians that are fighting for industry, fighting for oil and gas revenues, obviously fighting for jobs, and quite frankly, fighting to stay in office, to maintain that political support that they have, the United Conservatives in particular, having recently won that election. What are you keeping an eye on when it comes to the discussions that are happening, when it comes to the public barbs that are being tossed back and forth, maybe progress being made, we don't know, behind the scenes in conversations? Minister Guilbeault sounded somewhat optimistic yesterday in his conversation with us. What's jumping out at you in the context of what you're paying attention to and seeing in the news cycle right now?
Well, it seems like Premier Moe and Premier Smith have adopted a rhetorical strategy similar to what we experience here in the United States, which is just rage farming and creating partisan conflict about a variety of issues. And in this case, it's Alberta's right to utilize its natural resources as it sees fit, and the federal government's constitutional right to, as the Supreme Court has already established, to regulate carbon so that we can do our fair share in the fight against climate change. And I concur with Mr. Guilbeault in that it seems a bit rich that Moe and Smith are claiming that Guilbeault wants to shut down the oil sands. And I think he's far from that, and is trying to balance the needs of Alberta and Saskatchewan's economic future and our obligations to reduce carbon emissions. And it's especially poignant right now, given that the world is, in many places, is dealing with excessive heat, dangerous levels of excessive heat.
Yeah, it's sort of like, and I guess maybe this is just the way that we as humans are wired. It sometimes requires for us to pay full attention to something or to take something seriously for factors around us to start impacting us personally. It's not necessarily a positive character trait, but sometimes I think people can hear a lot of numbers. They can hear facts or ideas or theories. They can hear warnings. Don't look up, right? How about that film last year that captured everybody's attention? But until it impacts us directly and personally, people don't really care, right? I mean, quite frankly, I don't mean to sound like a cynic. Do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I think that, let's put this in some relevant historical context. I mean, Kyoto was 30 years ago, and we haven't done very much except meet and talk and commit to targets that we never meet. And a big part of that is just politics, the nature of politics. And in the American and Canadian democracies, I think it's fair to say that until the effects of climate change start to affect many of us personally, that our attention will waver and be more interested in other things.
Tell us about methane. The average person,
Sure.
I think, generally speaking, knows what methane is-ish. We understand that it is a factor at play when it comes to emissions from the oil and gas industry. We understand that when cows fart, they release methane into the environment, and the agriculture industry is a significant contributor to methane emissions in Canada, as are landfills, as you write about it. What's the big deal with methane?
Well, methane is the simplest hydrocarbon and has been humans have been using it to initially light the streets in London in the late 18th century, and we now use it primarily for heat, and also some petrochemical uses. We use it mainly for heat, and it's primarily made of methane. The oil and gas industry branded it as natural gas to make it sound benign. It's, I think, a better name for it would be methane gas because it's primarily made of methane. And methane is a gas that's even more potent than carbon dioxide in its ability to absorb heat. So it's 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide in the short term. I think the upside is, the other way to look at it is that we have an opportunity to curb carbon emissions in the short term by capturing leaked methane. And it shouldn't really cost much because the captured methane can then be sold as is the rest of the natural gas that makes it down to the end of the pipe. So it should be a win-win-win situation for everyone.
You assert in your feature in Alberta Views that Alberta's methane reduction claims can't be trusted, which is something I know that's grabbing a lot of people's attention. Before we get into your argument for that, why don't we talk about this GHG SAT? Why don't we talk about the technology that's used to monitor methane emissions, other emissions for that matter as well? Can you bring us up to speed and explain to us how this satellite works? So it has kind of a casual name about it.
Yeah, so I mean that was the thing that got me interested in the methane story in the first place, when I discovered that there were companies and governments around the world that were developing this technology to send very small satellites about the size of a shoebox up, or a microwave oven, I think is the better analogy, up into space, and they use sensors to measure methane emissions and plumes in real time. And it's not just sort of in general, but they could actually focus down to be able to identify exactly which facility is emitting methane. And that gives us a tool to figure out where the emissions are coming from, and then close off those leaks so that the product can be sold and not leaked into the atmosphere.
So this satellite is called Claire, right?
Well, there's a variety of the European Space Agency has their own satellites, and there's a Montreal-based company is GHGSat, which is what I mentioned in the article, and they have developed some of the most sophisticated technology and sensors, and has been funded by the federal government, and the oil sands industry, and the Alberta government has been a partner with them. And so it's a fascinating technology that we should be able to use to identify where the methane's coming from and stop it from wafting into the atmosphere.
So is it doing its job? Is it benefiting our understanding and ultimately our move to reduce methane emissions right now? Is the technology being leveraged in the way that it should?
Well, tools are only as good as the people that use them. And unfortunately, it doesn't appear that the Alberta government is using the more sophisticated satellite-based tools to observe and cap leaks. And I'm not sure why that is. I couldn't get the president and CEO of GHD sat to get back to me, nor would the Alberta Energy Regulator, any of the politicians or bureaucrats respond to me.
Why do you think that is?
You know, it's just part and parcel of being a journalist in Alberta for the last 10 years, probably more. Well, since Ralph Klein was premier, there's been this obsession with controlling information. And when people, especially journalists, ask pertinent questions, important questions, oftentimes nobody wants to talk about it. The great thing about the internet is that there's always plenty of information to be found, and I was able to uncover quite a bit of information about the use of these satellites, the way that the Alberta government models methane emissions in Alberta now, and the fundamental gap between the accuracy of the current methods and the actual amount of methane that's being emitted.
2025, like 2 years from now, or I guess a year and a half from now, you might say, is a significant year, right? It's a significant target. This is when Alberta, I guess, will be able to evaluate whether or not Alberta has been successful, if you can trust the numbers, I suppose, which is a point I bet you'll make. But Alberta is committed to reducing methane emissions almost by half, right? By 45% by 2025. How do you approach that? I would imagine you strike me as someone who has a healthy cynicism that drives your investigative journalism, but do you think, number one, that Alberta is on track as the government claims through its Department of Environment and Parks, and number two, do you think that the numbers can be trusted? So is the province on track, and if so, do you believe that the numbers can be trusted?
I highly doubt that the numbers can be trusted, and it's unclear whether that's a result of bad faith politics on the part of the United Conservatives, or whether it's a result of simply not adopting the best technology and relying on ineffectual monitoring efforts. I mean, we've seen this before in Alberta. If you'll remember way back when the regional, the ramp monitoring project in the oil sands was taken to task in the media, largely led by the work of David Schindler. And that monitoring, air and water monitoring system was found to be wholly inadequate. And I think what we're seeing here is a government that isn't really all that interested in knowing the true amount of methane coming out, and so devises these processes that are defensible in some regards, but they're not going out of their way to make sure that their accuracy is impeccable. They'd rather have low numbers and a trend that shows that their policy objectives are that their policies are working towards their objectives. It's highly unlikely that that's the case.
People that are watching this on YouTube are going to get some insight into how I read magazines. You can see I circle and outline and underline, and I just go through, and it just sort of helps me wrap my mind around what I'm reading. I circled here and put an asterisk by your assertion, or your observation, let me say here, that a 2020 study, a study from 3 years ago, found that methane emissions in Alberta and Saskatchewan, you say, are nearly twice what's being reported. I guess there are words for that, if true. That would be like cover up, dishonesty, fraud. I mean, there are words that would describe releasing numbers that are not accurate on a file as significant as this. Can you take us into this?
Sure. So anybody with a computer can go and find a multitude of scientific studies, peer-reviewed by professional researchers that have measured methane using other methodologies. So the Alberta government uses a methodology where they go to natural gas processing facilities and pipelines. They take some measurements with tools about how much this kind of compressor leaks, how much this kind of joint leaks or valve, and then they count up the number of those compressors and valves and multiply it by the leakage rates that they found in their on-the-ground studies. There's other ways to do that too. They go out with trucks and they have monitoring systems that monitors the methane in the air on the ground, and then they create these mathematical models based on these observations on the ground, and they come up with estimates. And 30 years ago, that was the best we could do. Today, we have many more sophisticated ways to measure methane. These scientific projects have used satellites. They've used airplanes fitted with sensors, and they have found, and this is not just in Alberta, this is worldwide. They have found that methane emissions are between twice and 4 times as high as what the ground-based estimates have been. And and that's over the last 5 to 10 years. I mentioned 3 or 4 studies that indicate that methane emissions in the oil and gas industry in Alberta and next door in Saskatchewan are somewhere between 2 and 4 times what the Alberta and Saskatchewan governments are telling us there are. And if you read the federal documents that catalog Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, they at least have the temerity to list that these are possibly not accurate because of all the research that's been done on methane emissions. So at least they acknowledge that that they're using the best data that's available, but that there's enough evidence to suggest that we need better methodologies to measure the amount of methane being leaked. And the problem with this is because, as I mentioned earlier, methane is such a much more potent greenhouse gas that, especially in the short term, that we're never going to meet our greenhouse gas targets if we keep leaking all this methane into the atmosphere. And so it's job one, and lots of other scholars, people at the Pembina Institute in Alberta, believe that dealing with methane in the short term is both cost effective and urgent in terms of reducing our carbon emissions.
I sometimes wonder, is a question too simple? So this is what my brain is asking me here, but like, why don't you think that it's a priority? If you can tick all of the boxes, if you can say that it could be or at least let's say not cost hindering. In other words, if it wouldn't come at an enormous expense to Alberta's economy, if it wouldn't mean thousands of layoffs, and you got to think of some of these, obviously rightfully so, factor into decisions that politicians or industry leaders make, obviously. But if the boxes are ticked there, if you can make the cost argument, if you can also establish that this would be a good faith move, that this would be a feather in Alberta and Saskatchewan's cap, that this would be great for the province or the industry's reputation on a national and global scale, why do you think it's not being taken seriously? Is it too simple of a question?
Well, I've been asking myself about these kinds of that question about all kinds of issues in Alberta, and I don't really know. If I had to guess, the narrative that Alberta is already meeting its methane reduction goals would be a good news story, and the government wouldn't have to do anything about it, and industry would be off the hook to do the work that's necessary to reduce methane leaks. It beggars the imagination as to why we wouldn't want to fix the problem, given that it is at least half of the cost of fixing the problem would be recouped by selling the methane that's leaking into the atmosphere at this point. So, I'm just at a loss really for words or understanding about why we're not picking the low-hanging fruit here.
Yeah, low-hanging fruit. We're talking to Jeff Gailus in just a second. We're talking Alberta and Saskatchewan. I want to ask you about the border city, about Lloydminster, something that happened there a while ago that Canadian technology, overseeing bodies, the Alberta Energy Regulator, wasn't on anybody's radar until a French outfit put it there.
Yep.
I want to get you to tell us that story, Jeff, in just a second. These conversations don't happen without Real Talk sponsors, and one of those that we're really proud to support, of course, is the YWCA of Edmonton, and we were all really excited when we heard that the YWCA of Edmonton was named as the charity of choice for this year's K-Days 50-50. So this is obviously a huge opportunity for everybody at the YWCA, and, quite frankly, they need your help. And so we're asking you to join their volunteer team on the K-Days grounds. If you've got some spare time, if you love the work that the Y does, if maybe you'd like to just get out and about, you love meeting new people, we're looking for volunteers on the grounds of K-Days between July 21st and 30th. So this is coming up to help spread the word about that 50-50. Now, there's a whole bunch of benefits that include free entry to the grounds, free transportation on ETS, and a $10 food voucher. But, of course, also, you're being part of the movement for change. You can register as a volunteer at ywcafedmonton.org, and we're just going to go ahead and put that link into the show notes on YouTube and on the podcast so we can make it nice and simple. We'd love to hear from you. If you are going to be volunteering for the YWCA of Edmonton, let us know. Hit us up on Instagram or with a tweet, and we'd be happy to share that story. Love that organization and everything they're doing. We mentioned the live streaming audio app Mixlr. That's how a lot of you listen to Real Talk on the go. That's proudly presented by our friends at California Closets. They are the masters of custom closets, storage solutions for the entire home. You can make the most of your space with their custom organizational systems. Nobody does it like the team at California Closets. We speak with personal experience. Coming up on about 10 years ago, my wife Carrie and I reached out to them. We sat down with their design team. Reese is one of the talented professionals there, and we said, here's our budget, here's what we're looking to do, and the finished product, absolutely masterful. Well, of course, they've been doing primary bedrooms, and they've been doing entertainment centers and living spaces, but they're really getting big into the garage game. So if you'd like the workhorse of your home, the garage, to start working better for you, if you'd like to get the bikes up on a rack, you get those extension cords put away, maybe have your socket set somewhere that you're actually be able to find it. You want to be able to find your hockey gloves and the ice scraper, and where is that jug of coolant that you had for the car? Why not trust a garage storage system to the talented team at California Closets? Nobody does it better, and the consultation's free. You'll find them online at californiaclosets.ca. You know that Friesen Brothers is proudly Alberta-grown and Alberta-owned, right? Still family-owned after more than 65 years of operations, and boy, are they ever proud community members in the 16 different jurisdictions where you'll find a Friesen Brothers. They want us to let you know that on July 22nd, they've got Watermelon Fest coming up. That's this coming Saturday. The event's going to feature various activities like the watermelon eating contest. Johnny's going to be there. I can't wait to watch him in action. Your chance to win a watermelon prize box containing Friesen Brothers gift cards, all kinds of cool stuff, free balloons and crowns for the kids, a lot of summer fun, and there's also a vegan feast coming up at Friesen Brothers. You can find them online. All those details at friesen.com. That's FRESON.com. Have you thought of your strategy yet for the watermelon eating contest? You're going to go ahead and just... I don't even know if you have to chew it.
You don't.
No, you just bite it off and hammer it back, and there you go.
You quickly blend it in your mouth.
Yes. Oh, very well said. The Joey Chestnut of watermelon. It's our very own John Hicks. Hey, I've been watching over the last few days the team at Eden Landscaping at work in our backyard. We were telling you that we hired them. I guess the conversation started about 6 months ago. They started looking through our ideas, our plans, the photos that we'd pulled, and basically, after talking about them so much, I said, well, we want you to bring our outdoor space to life. We've got a backyard that obviously has 2 big dogs, right? We've got 2 young boys as well, and we need our yard to be functional, but we also want it to look really good, and we're on a budget. And so it's been amazing to see that team put a plan together that we're all really excited about. It's been an absolute pleasure dealing with them because they understand what it means for a family to bring to the table everything that they have, but also, of course, to hand a project over to the professionals. Sometimes, if you're like me, you have a hard time handing things off to somebody else. Well, with the custom landscaping services that Eden Landscaping provides, you quickly realize that you can be confident putting your dream space, your biggest investment, your home, into their capable hands. It's full project management that comes with part of the deal with Eden Landscaping. If you're going to be bringing an outdoor space to life in the next, 3 to 12 months, why not take 5 minutes today and check out landscapeedmonton.ca. You know, Jeff and I were talking about landfills. This is part of the conversation around methane. I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you that when it comes to garbage and recycling, if you're a decision maker for a big or a small business, maybe for a municipality, and you want to be dealing with a company that you can trust, you want to be dealing with a company where a real live human picks up the phone and you give them a call, maybe we recommend Local Environmental Services. They're operating in Alberta and Saskatchewan, based out of Edmonton, Whitecourt, Regina, and they're doing things a little bit different. As their website says, some people may say it's only garbage, but not to Local Environmental Services. They believe that communities deserve better. If you want to see what that means, who is local, you can check them out online at localenvironmental.ca. Chances are, after a free quote from them, you're going to realize you'll be paying less when you take your business to Local Environmental Services. Jeff Gailus, our guest this morning, he's got a feature piece, an excellent one at that, in the July-August issue of Alberta Views magazine, Hidden Harm, Why Alberta's Claims on Methane Reduction Can't Be Trusted. We're getting into it today with the author, who's joining us live from his home in Missoula, Montana. Let's talk about this story that happened near Lloydminster, a big plume, a big flare-up. Can you tell us what happened and why you think it wasn't on the radar of any governing body or oversight in Alberta until someone from France chimed in and put it on the radar?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing with satellites. It doesn't matter where you're based.
Yeah.
You could be based at the North Pole or the South Pole. As long as you got a computer and some software that's hooked up to the satellite, you can get the data and download it and see, often in real time, what is going on in terms of methane emissions. So what basically happened is a French company, using the European Space Agency's data, discovered that, and they were using the fine scale real-time data, that there was a huge methane leak in Lloydminster on the Saskatchewan border. And they kindly let the Alberta government know, and the Alberta government and the Alberta Energy Regulator had no idea. And the irony is that the Alberta Energy Regulator subscribes to the same data, the same data that the French company was using, but they chose to get the cheaper version that averages methane emissions out over time, so you don't get these point source leaks, which is a major part of the problem. I mean, there's persistent leaks, of course, which generally are smaller and continuous, But every now and then you get a blowout somewhere, and that's what happened at Lloydminster. And the Alberta government had no idea, nor did industry. I mean, whose responsibility is it? It would be nice if the government made the industry's responsibility, but they're loath to do that. They seem to be ideologically predisposed to not want to regulate the oil and gas industry very well.
We've talked a lot about Alberta's energy regulator in the past year on the show, and we've had a ton of different opinions and expert voices on it. I think one of the sort of the focal points, or certainly one of the things that you and I referenced earlier, sometimes something has to happen to somebody or to a group of people before something is taken seriously. The environment minister brought this up yesterday. He had seen our interview with Chief Alan Adam from the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation. We're talking about that leak, that toxic leak from the Curl facility, the Imperial Oil's facility in northern Alberta. This leak that had occurred for, it's estimated at a minimum of 9 months. And to think of toxic and harmful chemicals seeping into land and water for nearly a year before anybody noticed or did anything about it kind of boggles the mind. You don't have to be a PEng, or you don't have to have years of industry experience to understand why that's problematic. And a lot of people, rightfully so, have been asking the question, can Alberta's energy regulator be trusted? Is it a competent body? I mean, you know, we're seeing these staggering numbers when it comes to the liabilities on orphan wells. I mean, that's another subject matter that I know that you've paid some attention to. You write about it a little bit in your piece in Alberta Views, and I think more and more Canadians are becoming concerned at what that liability might look like. I mean, we're talking, you know, $100+ billion, depending on the numbers. I've seen it as high as $250 billion. Well, what's your take, if I can ask you to speak candidly, about Alberta's energy regulator?
Well, yes, the Alberta energy regulator seems to not be doing its job very effectively. But I guess a couple of things. One, it depends on what you think their job is. For many of us, it's we think that it should be enforcing the rules and regulations and laws to prevent the oil and gas industry or the coal industry or whatever from having undue environmental impacts and also social and health impacts. The other point I'd make is, before it was the AER, it was something else. I can't remember the names of all the agencies that regulated the energy industry over the decades, but they weren't any better either. And so this is just a tradition in Alberta where we give a pass to industry. And if you talk to the sort of legal scholars around environmental regulation, I think they would say, I know they would say that the biggest problem is that there's so much discretion in our regulatory system. It's not it's not, take the tailings ponds. Tailings ponds were supposed to have been decreasing in size and being reclaimed over the last 3 decades. None of that's ever happened. And that's even though it's in their permits and there's been plans for that to happen, it just doesn't happen because it's expensive. We actually don't know how to do it yet. So this techno optimism, where technology will solve all problems in a timely way, has fallen flat on its face, and it takes time and energy away from, say, increasing production. And so there seems to be, I mean, some kind of ideological, at base, ideological understanding that regulations should be should not get in the way of maximizing production and profit maximization. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of as to why we so poorly manage the oil and gas and coal industry as well, because there's no other logic that would explain why it's happening. And I take journalism ethics seriously. Journalists are, and I grew up believing that it was my job to provide the facts and let people make up their mind. But it seems increasingly that it's helpful to have some analysis and join the dots so that people don't just see a data point in the news every day, but they have some much greater context in which to situate that data point so they can have a better understanding of why things the way they are.
Yeah, it's just, to me, and I know I'm not saying anything profound here, but it's never lost on me that something can be a very real issue that impacts people. Like right now, what are we talking about? We're talking about industry and we're talking about the environment, right? Generally speaking, this is the conversation that we're having. And it seems to me like that's 50% of the conversations that we have on this show. Most especially when Alberta wind up in the news. And it is Alberta, right? And it's something that impacts everybody. And who doesn't want to see everybody employed and earning good money? And who doesn't want to see people with bright employment futures? And who doesn't want to see all of that? Who doesn't want to see the tax revenue collected, for that matter, to help build healthy communities, et cetera, et cetera? But at what cost? Like, at the same time, who doesn't want to protect the planet? And I feel like, with pieces like yours, the alarm is being sounded, but still, and this isn't a shot at you, or it's not a shot at me. Maybe it's just an indictment of all of us as human beings. If you were to walk down Stephen Avenue in Calgary, or you were to walk, I don't know, down, Taylor Drive, you're talking to people in Red Deer, or you're in Edmonton walking down White Avenue, ask the average person, how much do you know about methane? Or how much do you know about Alberta's targets? Or how much do you know about the good, the bad, and the ugly? Or how much do you understand about this? The average person has so much going on. They're going to go, what I know right now is my kids needs to be at soccer by 5:30 tonight, and this weekend we're going to Mom's for dinner, and right? And it's just, and you can, like, we've had guests on this show. I think of Mark Doran, who's come on this show talking about orphan wells. I mean, the guy's screaming it from the rooftops. The guy's, metaphorically speaking, sending off flares, trying to get people's attention. But still, it's like when you look at the general public, it just seems like, I hate to say it, but it's almost like nobody cares. Do you get the same feeling?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had. The first one, let me tell you about the first time this surprised me. I was in Edmonton for a conference, and I was walking, I can't remember, I was walking back to the friend's house I was staying at, and it was, midnight, because there was the evening party and dinner that we had, and I was walking back, and there was a cigar shop that was open at midnight, and I'm like, that's interesting. I like a good cigar, or I did then, I don't now. So I pop in, and sure enough, it's open, and there's a Korean Canadian guy there who asked me what I was doing out so late, and they had a little bar, look at the counter with stools, and I told him what I liked in cigars. He went and grabbed me one. Anyways, we started chit-chatting about, he's like, why are you wandering the streets, and what are you doing in Edmonton? And I told him I was living in Canmore, and I was a journalist, and I was at this conference about environmental issues. And he pulled a bottle of whiskey up from the bottom of the counter and said, I want to talk about this. Nice. And so I had a conversation a little bit like we're having now, but I was far less informed then. I was like naive. I was a naive young journalist. And he was shocked at the environmental issues that I was telling him about. And I'll never forget, he's like, isn't that what the government is supposed to do? And I said, yeah, you'd think. And, that was back in the end, at the end of Ralph Klein's term, which seems, passably idealistic by the notions of what we're working with today with Danielle Smith and her, as I call them, apparatchiks in the government. especially with the methane issue. This is a win-win-win. It's not expensive. Industry can make some money on it. And the estimates of methane, the honest, more likely estimates are that it's like 8 times, I say in the article, 8 times more methane leakage than in the abandoned and orphaned oil wells we have in the province. And Premier Smith wants to spend $20 billion through the renamed R-Star program to incentivize these oil companies to fix their abandoned and orphaned wells, partly because of methane leakage, whereas it would be relatively inexpensive to deal with the methane issue and reduce carbon emissions even more. But that would need the government to admit that their claims about meeting the methane reduction limits, they would have to admit that that's not the case. And I think they're loath to do that.
Well,
it's just about saving face.
You drop a couple bombs in your piece. I want to read. I always love reading someone's writing to them and watching them respond. But you finish your piece in Alberta Views. Methane is both invisible and perilous, you write, which makes it a potent symbol for the inscrutable logic of Alberta's increasingly out-of-touch conservative politicians. Until we free ourselves from leaders that exude such palpable duplicity and incompetence, not a great review, we'll never know with any certainty, you write, whether our government is telling us the truth and looking after our best interests. You say history suggests this formula will only lead to the continued degradation of our land, water, and air, and to an even hotter climate. The reason I mention that is that someone that's going to be listening to this is going to say, well, what the hell can I do about this? What am I supposed to do about this? So what's the call to action? Starting with an email, I guess, to your MLA?
Yeah, I mean, write to your MLA, go visit your MLA. I mean, the more personal and substantive your communication is, the better it will be received. And you can also, give money to groups like the Pembina Institute or join groups depending on what your proclivity is. And increasingly in Alberta, your vote is very important because for most of my lifetime, we were a one-party state. And we're almost a two-party state now. And so that makes your vote even more precious. And one interesting thing, in this regard is that if you read the polling of Albertans, they overwhelmingly, like by, 60 to 80% want better environmental management, among other things. They recognize that we need to reduce our CO2 emissions and other kinds of pollution and so on. And but when Albertans go to the polls, they elect the Conservatives. And since Ralph Klein, so that's about 30 years, we've basically had more or less the same. I remember Ralph Klein on an interview just after he left politics, when asked about the oil sands and the negative economic, because remember, there were negative economic consequences because of the rapidity with which we developed those resources and environmental issues. And he was asked, was this your plan? And he said, you know what? We had no idea. And we had no idea what the impacts of rapid oil sands development would be. So vote wisely is I think the most important thing. And
you don't write much about like sort of the political history in the piece, so I might be putting you on the spot here. But if you're going to say vote wisely, the implication would be that you're talking about I mean, I guess the way that I would like to interpret your comment is that make this an election issue. That's how I like to frame it. Not necessarily to either vote for this party or vote for this party, but what you're implying, I think, is that the NDP might take this more seriously. Was there anything that happened as far as you know, or have you paid any attention to the track record of the Notley NDP from 2015 to 2019 that leads you to believe that they were taking this any more seriously?
Not necessarily the methane issue, but certainly, climate change and carbon emissions, and they passed a better carbon reduction plan than we've seen since. So let's be fair, the NDP, even under Notley, when I was a cub journalist in Canmore, I mean, I had so many conversations with her because she was the environmental critic, and she was much more critical of the oil and gas industry and the forestry industry back then. But when you're running, when the party ended up getting close to winning, she became more centrist than leftist, and that's just, I guess, what you're going to find in a province where oil and gas is the primary driver of the economy. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to explicitly tell people who to vote for, but my concern, and the reason I still write about Alberta from Montana, is because that's my home. And love it, like it or not, that's my home. And my worry is that we're not paying attention to the near future, and we're only focusing on the moment. And my worry is that Alberta is going to not be prepared for when oil demand decreases and everything becomes electrified, because we will do something about climate change, whether we're actually going to meet our goals for 2025, 2035. Eventually, it's going to get so bad that we're not going to be burning fossil fuels. And if Alberta doesn't position itself in such a way to transition to that new reality, we're going to end up like the United Kingdom after Brexit. The once ruling empire of the globe is a shadow of its former self. And it is going through so many economic and social issues because the right-wing conservatives duped the people into voting to leave the EU. And it is having calamitous impacts on working class people, especially. So that's why I do what I do. I care about the future of Alberta. I don't like being critical all the time, but them's the facts. And I just hope more and more people will begin to realize that we can have an affluent economy and be ethical, truly ethical, and environmentally progressive all at the same time. But that's going to require us to not be afraid, and not be afraid of embracing the changes that are coming and preparing for them. Exactly.
Jeff, it's pretty rare that an interview on this show, we love doing deep dives. We like really sinking our teeth into something, but it's pretty rare that we'll talk to somebody for almost an hour as we have with you. But I was hoping to do exactly that, and to really get into this piece to help us better understand methane, to understand some of the pros and the cons of the scenario right now, and to try to answer that question of why is this not being taken more seriously. I appreciate everything that you've brought to the table, and thanks for sticking around longer than we asked you to stick around. That's not lost on us. It's been
all right, man.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
I'm happy to be here, and appreciate all that you do to not just methane or carbon issues, but all the stuff you talk about. and broadcast to a wider audience. I watch your stuff. You have amazing guests, and you're doing your part to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Next time you're in Edmonton, we got a humidor actually right here in the studio. So if you so if you're up for a dram and a smoke, you let me know, and we'd be happy to hook you up.
Sounds awesome.
Okay, my man. That's
Bye-bye.
Jeff Gailus. You can read his piece Hidden Harm in the summer issue. This is the July-August issue of Alberta Views magazine, and wanted to remind you one more time, if you go to albertaviews.ca right now and subscribe, use the promo code AVRJ, like Alberta Views, Ryan Jesperson, AVRJ. It's going to knock down the price of a 1-year subscription. That's 10 issues by 50%. It means you're going to pay $20 for 10 issues of Alberta Views delivered to your door. Appreciate that, the passion there. Hey, he says, that's my home. I care about it. I saw the chat. The chat's banging this morning. It's awesome. But I saw somebody make the comment that said, "Oh, he hates conservatives," and I kind of thought, I mean, people can vote whatever they want, people can feel whichever way they want, but I think that you'd have to sort of really sell yourself on the idea. You'd have to work hard to convince yourself after reading his piece, which you can online, Hidden Harm. You can read the article that this is being written because of some sort of political bias. He's talking about the environment. He's talking about industry. He's talking about the facts. He's talking about satellite monitoring. I don't understand how that. It kind of reminded me. I'm going to go out in left field here for a second, but I promise I'll bring it back, or at least I'll try to. Okay. But I remember in my previous job on terrestrial radio, we were having, and they're difficult conversations. When Spotlight, that movie, came out, I think it was the Boston Globe reporters that really blew the doors off the sex scandal, the abuse scandal that has plagued the Catholic Church around the world for more than 100 years. And I don't think that anybody would not understand what we're talking about here. But it was very timely at that moment, including in the province of Alberta, where there had been revelations made and survivors had come forward and some of these stories were being told, and there was evidence of cover-ups, of priests being reassigned to different parishes, to different cities, to different communities, when the bishops or the cardinals knew that they were abusers, knew what they were up to, and they had not reported them to police, and they had tried to keep it covered up and in-house, and they were allowing these individuals, most of them men, to continue this abuse on these innocent children, and they knew what was going to happen here, and it is disgraceful and deplorable, and so we're talking about this, and we're bringing guests on. We had someone from one of the archdioceses that came on the show to talk about it, which I appreciated, and I remember some of the chat at that time on our text line, people were saying, why do you have this axe to grind with the Catholic Church? Why do you hate believers? Why do you hate Catholics? And I'm sitting there going, the people that should be most upset about this are the Catholics.
100%.
The people. This is not a shot at your faith. This is not a shot at your God. This is an indictment. This is the facts and an indictment that your institution is poisoned, right? And it's the same thing here. I mean, if somebody is calling your chosen party's politicians or elected representatives to the carpet because they're not doing the job that they have been entrusted to do, the people that should be most upset about this are the people that have put their faith in that party, in that institution, in those elected officials.
It's like Adler said, like the right needs to, be louder.
Speak up.
Call people out. I mean, it's not looking good here with the regulator and the Alberta government looking like they're in cahoots. I mean, how he just said that France had to ring the alarm bells on that big methane leak. That shouldn't be happening.
That's embarrassing.
It is. When he was talking about it, I was like, this is just, and so the right and conservatives should stand up and say, hey, we want better people.
100%. Don't you want if you're an ardent conservative, if you're a proud conservative, don't you want your party? Don't you want your premier, your senior cabinet ministers to be seen as trustworthy, as honest, as diligent, as competent? Don't you want that? Don't you want to change people's minds? That's what we asked Mike Lake about on Tuesday, the Conservative MP, when he joined me in studio. How does the party win in ridings where it's not currently holding seats? Well, you got to change people's minds. You got to impress people. You got to prove to people that you're the better alternative to form government.
And I love how Jeff said, this is all going to blow up in your face when we don't have time to rectify all the things that are going to start happening to the planet. It's already happening. the rise in temperature, everything. And when it all blows up, nobody wants to be the one who says, I told you so. Because we're all going to be
You know what
fucked.
our tendency as humans is, though? Our tendency as humans is that, something is going to happen down the road, but it's not happening yet, right? It's why we all rack up credit cards, right? Because we want the now,
Here and now.
and we're not worried about the later. So everybody knows, whether and global demand for oil is high right now. I mean, Jeff writes about this in his piece. I wonder if I can find it on the fly here as we're talking. But one of the issues I think that some real talkers took with what MP Lake had to say on Tuesday, where he basically says that the feds are trying to slow down and kill the oil industry, and people are saying the oil industry is doing more now than it ever has done capacity wise. Business is booming, which is great. It's great.
Demand is
on one
up.
front, demand is up. That's great.
And it's projected to go further up.
But it's not going to last forever. And
No.
so how do you balance those priorities? Obviously, cashing in on what you can now, but also setting yourself up for success in the future. Here are the numbers I was talking about per Jeff's piece in Alberta Views. In the context of whether or not Alberta's industry is on track to meet its 45% methane reduction target by 2025, coming up a couple of years from now, oil production over the last decade has increased by 58%. Gas production increased by 21%. That's huge. That's great if you work in oil and gas or if you're a shareholder, But again, what's it going to look like 50 years from now? And will Alberta still be the have province driving the Canadian economy like it is right now?
Well, it's easy math. More people, more cars, more heat needed, more gas, natural gas, more oil production needed. But at some point, we're going to hit peak production. At some point, I mean, according to scientists, we're going to run out, right? And it may not be you or me sitting here when it happens, but it's going to be our kids or our kids' kids. And they're going to be like, what were you guys doing the whole time? Well, we knew it was coming. We just didn't think it was going to come that fast.
Yeah. Daniel on our live chat says that's humans. We're reactive. We're not proactive for the most part. Don says, no. I'm going to tell you, told you so, says Don. When we've invested trillions and taxed trillions and the temperature is still up that 1.5 degrees, says Don, we can't regulate the sun. I don't know, Don. That kind of sounds a little bit defeatist, doesn't it? That we can't do anything about it, so we should just kind of take it? I don't know. There's a lot of, Don also said, for somebody that doesn't smoke cigars anymore, Jeff sure sounded excited at the end there. That is fair. I'm not trying to get him back on cigars if he quit, but we do love entertaining here in the Real Talk studio. Coming up in just a second, Johnny's got an update on, and we're going to be talking about this on our Friday Roundtable tomorrow. I'm super excited about it. But are two of the world's richest humans seriously going to brawl?
I hope so.
Actually physically fight?
Yeah.
Johnny has an update on the Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk MMA fight that may or may not happen in just a second. Oh, geez. But first, how can we talk about the bright future of the Alberta economy, including energy generation, without mentioning our good friends at Kubi Renewable Energy? If you happen to live in our home city of Edmonton, wanted to let you know there's some really good news for you. The city of Edmonton's helping Edmontonians install solar systems on their homes by offering a 40 cent per watt toward the cost of the system. It's kind of a subsidy, basically, which covers 15% of the cost of going solar. And rebate stacking is actually permitted with the Canada Greener Homes Grant program, which we've told you about before. You can read more about it on the blog link at kubienergy.ca. Up to a maximum of 100% of the total investment made by the homeowner. So basically, this is great news if you're thinking of going green. You can trust Team Kubi. And if you're watching on YouTube right now, you can see these are some photos. We've just got these of their brand new HQ. Kubi's opened a beautiful new office in Edmonton, and they're opening one in Calgary as well. Kudos to them. And they're hiring. So you're going, what, did you guys sneak in a photo of beer taps there? That is at the Kubi HQ. Friday ball hockey tournaments, cold beer on tap, nothing like working for Kubi. If you're have your ticket, if you're a journeyman or you're an apprentice and you'd love to, work in an area that has a really bright future, today's the day to go check out employment opportunities at kubienergy.com. Apex Automation also hiring. If you're a professional engineer, I imagine that there's a lot of engineers that are probably going to be tuning into this episode, considering the subject matter, what we're talking about. You don't have to tell you that there's a lot going on in Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan involving automation, and nobody is doing more on this front than our friends at Apex Automation. They're growing their team, which means this could be a great opportunity for you. They're looking for the best and brightest in Canada. Folks that are either experienced in engineering, fabrication, and automation, or those that would like to be. You can get the ball rolling today by checking out the careers link. Maybe you're a recent graduate from an engineering school here in Western Canada. You'll find all the details online at apexautomation.ca. This studio that we operate out of every single day is built magnificently, if you ask me, by the team at Complete Care Restoration. One of the things they had to do right out of the gates was source out a water leak that had been a problem here for a long time. Of course, considering all the electronics we were bringing in, we needed them to fix this. It was amazing to see them source out the problem and then do work to ensure it was not going to happen again. They're the pros. This is what they do. They do a lot of construction and renovation projects. This time of year, unfortunately, for homeowners, fire and flood damage is very relevant. It's a real thing, and this means that this is one of the busiest times of year for the team at Complete Care Restoration. We saw firsthand how much they give a rip, how much they care about what they do. If you find yourself in one of those tough circumstances, impacted by fire or flood, make your first call. Complete Care Restoration. You can check them out online at completecarerestoration.ca. And a lot of talk about Alberta's oil sands this week, of course, from both sides of the political aisle and from civilian perspectives as well. You know that oil sands operations contribute significant carbon emissions in Canada, so the 6 largest companies are working together and with governments. We've heard more details on that this week on the show to take strides on the path to net zero from their operations. Part of this plan includes developing a proposed carbon capture and storage network by 2030. It's going to be one of the world's largest. You can learn more by checking out pathwaysalliance.ca. So I figured that this had to be a joke, but it looks like...
I think we all did.
Or Elon Musk, I can't understand. I mean, I understand what you have to gain if you win a fight like this, but if you lose a fight like this as an egomaniac, I don't know if you ever recover. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, Johnny, are they actually going to physically fight?
Well, I was under the impression this was a joke or just two guys who are mad because Threads is versus Twitter now, and they're both like you said, they're not millionaires, they're billionaires. So a fight, I don't think you're not in it for the money. But anyways, Forbes now reporting that we could be actually getting close to a fight between the two. And I'll give you a timeline of how it happened. So a couple weeks ago, the idea of a cage match was first posted by Musk over Twitter, where he responded to a thread about Instagram's then upcoming rival app Threads. Everyone's on it now, obviously. He said, "I'm up for a cage match if he is." And Zuckerberg responded the next day with an Instagram story showing a screenshot of Musk's tweet. And he just responded, "Send me location," which is it's a big call out on Twitter that people put out. Anyways, later, the hype picked up for this because actually Dana White had this shirt made, which showed basically promotion for the fight. Zuckerberg versus Musk. So he threw this up and people were like, wait a minute, is Dana actually in to have this fight? And then quoted in a July 1st story from the New Yorker, it said that he was overheard saying he would help organize an exhibition match between the two CEOs. And then what happens the next week? We see Musk right here. Yeah. If you're watching on YouTube, training. He's starting to train because he's hanging out with George St. Pierre,
yeah,
and other incredible MMA fighters. He's actually training. And then the next day, what does Zuckerberg post? Oh, I'm training MMA as well.
Oh, jeez.
Here he is with some serious UFC champions. Israel, I hope I pronounce this right, Adesanya and Alexander Volkanovski. And so after this, we started seeing pictures of them. Because these were just photos we thought were for like clout. Like, here's me hanging out with a couple dudes. No, look, here's them actually grappling, actually learning moves. And so now we're thinking that if this happens, it will be a UFC event. But hey, it's not in the books for sure. But here's the thing. Bettors are already getting in on this. And that's what usually makes a fight go through, is when bettors like DraftKings, who have already set odds for the fight.
Well, who's favored?
Favored is Zuckerberg.
Yeah,
because he's in better shape. He's younger.
Well, apparently he's somewhat of an experienced, I think it's jiu-jitsu, what do you say, practitioner? You know, he's someone that's like, it's not just a hobby for him. This is something that he's taken seriously for quite some time.
So near constant physical activity is what DraftKings says. So they've got him as the favorite, and Musk at a basically, if you put $100 on Zuckerberg, you're going to win back at 160. If you put $100 on Musk, you're going to win back 130. But this could actually happen. But what would be?
It's not going to happen.
It's just bragging rights, right?
I for me, it's like you have to ask, what does somebody have to gain? What is it they say? It was like the cost-benefit analysis or whatever. Like, what does someone have to gain versus what do they have to lose? And I just think if you're someone like Elon Musk, you know, taking the loss, like if Zuckerberg punches him between the eyes and breaks his nose and he goes down and he's sitting there, like, I just don't know that you ever... I don't know why I'm thinking of Joe Exotic right now. I will never financially recover from this.
But
I
now,
don't know if your reputation ever recovers.
Yeah. Now that we have talked about this, we are kind of joking because we like you said, I think we pretty much know this won't happen for sure. But we are going to be talking a lot about both those guys tomorrow on our roundtable.
That's right. We're looking forward to it. That is coming up on tomorrow's show. It's our Friday roundtable. As you know, it's our weekly tradition, and we're going to be welcoming in some social media experts, but they're also just hilarious people as we take a look at some of the headlines and the news of the day. So you can catch that right here on Friday's episode of Real Talk. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today and let you know, again, when it comes to how these episodes land with you, we appreciate when you tell people in your orbit about the show, when you share the content, when you share the episode, when you review it. Maybe give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast provider. Whatever it is, let's grow this audience so these messages, these important conversations are getting out there and making an impact. Thanks.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive